Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to remember one of the most brutal and defining battles of World War I, the Battle of Verdun. Fought between the French and German forces from February to December 1916, Verdun was not just a military confrontation. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and national spirit. The Battle of Verdun held immense strategic significance in World War I, not only because of its location but also because of its symbolic value. Verdun was situated in northeastern France, on the banks of the Meuse River, and it was one of the oldest and most heavily fortified positions in France. Its fortifications had been built over the course of the 19th century to protect the French heartland from potential German invasions. As a result, the city was seen as a vital part of France's defense against Germany and represented the strength of the French military infrastructure. For the Germans, Verdun offered a target that was both militarily strategic and emotionally charged. General Erich von Falkenhayn, the chief of the German General Staff, believed that if they could break through Verdun's defenses, it would demoralize the French and force them to withdraw or surrender large portions of their territory. He also viewed Verdun as a symbol of French pride and national identity, and his strategy aimed to bleed France white by forcing them to commit their best troops to defend it, knowing that the French would not easily abandon such a vital, symbolic site. Falkenhayn's assumption was that the French would sacrifice anything to hold Verdun, which would cause their resources to be stretched to the breaking point. He underestimated the resolve and resilience of the French forces and leadership. Verdun, therefore, became the focal point of the German offensive strategy, which would cost both sides devastatingly in terms of human lives and military resources. Furthermore, Verdun's position along the river provided the Germans with a clear route toward the heart of France, making it an attractive target for a breakthrough. However, its entrenched fortifications also meant that it would be incredibly difficult to capture, and any attempt to do so would require massive artillery bombardments and frontal assaults. This geographical and symbolic significance made Verdun a unique battleground in World War I. It wasn't just about winning a military victory. It was about breaking the spirit of the French people and forcing them to concede to German demands. The Germans believed that if they could succeed in Verdun, it would have psychological repercussions far beyond the battlefield, possibly leading to a collapse of French morale and a shift in the momentum of the war in their favor. The German strategy for the Battle of Verdun, orchestrated by General Erich von Falkenhayn, was based on the principle of attrition, wearing down the enemy to the point of collapse. Falkenhayn believed that this battle could be a decisive blow to the French war effort by targeting a key French symbol, one that the French would fight desperately to defend. His reasoning was that the French would commit their best forces and resources to protect Verdun, thus exhausting themselves in the process. This approach was rooted in the belief that if France bled heavily in this singular battle, it would severely weaken its ability to continue the war, eventually leading to a negotiated peace or outright surrender. Falkenhayn's plan, known as the Bleed France White strategy, hinged on the idea that the French would view Verdun not merely as a military outpost, but as a symbol of national pride. Verdun was a historic fortress city, and the French leadership, knowing its importance, could not afford to abandon it without risking national humiliation. Falkenhayn calculated that, by drawing the French into a prolonged conflict at Verdun, France would have to sacrifice thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of soldiers. He envisioned a scenario where the French army would be forced to pour endless reinforcements into the area in order to hold their ground, eventually leading to the depletion of French manpower and resources. The German plan relied heavily on artillery bombardment. Falkenhayn understood that artillery was the key to breaking down the entrenched defenses of Verdun. The Germans launched one of the most extensive artillery bombardments ever seen, with over 1 million shells fired in the early stages of the battle. The constant shelling was meant to demoralize the French defenders, disrupt their supply lines, and destroy the fortifications that had made Verdun so difficult to capture. Additionally, Falkenhayn counted on exploiting the pressure put on the French by a battle of attrition. His forces were prepared to fight for every inch of ground, gradually pushing the French back while inflicting heavy losses. By breaking the morale of the defenders, he hoped that the French would be unable to maintain the momentum of their counterattacks, leading to a German victory through sheer exhaustion of the French forces. Falkenhayn's strategy also anticipated that Britain and other Allied forces would be unable to relieve the pressure on Verdun in time. At the time, the Western Front was stretched thin, with the Allies already engaged in other major offensives, such as on the Somme. This gave the Germans confidence that the French would be isolated and forced to defend Verdun at all costs. In summary, the German strategy at Verdun was a carefully calculated plan designed to exploit French nationalism and force them into a battle of attrition. Falkenhayn believed that this would eventually break the French army and lead to a German victory without the need for a major breakthrough or a prolonged war of movement. Unfortunately for the Germans, the strategy proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation, as it underestimated the resilience and resolve of the French defenders and the eventual impact of the battle on both sides. The French response to the German offensive at Verdun was defined by a fierce determination to defend their homeland and preserve the honor of their nation. From the outset, the battle took on a symbolic significance for the French, as Verdun was not just another military position. It was a symbol of French pride, history, and national identity. The French leadership, particularly General Philippe Pétain, understood that the defense of Verdun was crucial, not only for the military situation but also for maintaining the morale of the entire nation. General Pétain's role in the defense of Verdun cannot be overstated. Appointed to the command of the defense in early 1916, Pétain quickly became a symbol of resilience and leadership. His famous rallying cry, "Ils ne passeront pas, they shall not pass," became an emblem of French resistance and unity. Pétain recognized the immense pressure that Verdun was under and was determined to make it a line that the Germans would never cross. He understood that the Germans sought to break France by taking Verdun, and he made it his mission to prevent that from happening at all costs. Pétain implemented several key measures to ensure the survival of Verdun and the success of the defense. One of his primary actions was to improve the logistics of troop rotation, ensuring that fresh troops would regularly replace exhausted defenders. This was critical in preventing the French forces from becoming fatigued in the face of constant German assaults. The defenders at Verdun were subjected to grueling conditions, with little rest and limited supplies, but Pétain's system allowed them to continue their fight without being completely worn down. Additionally, Pétain worked tirelessly to maintain communication between the various sectors of the battlefield. Verdun was a vast and complex defense network, with a series of forts, trenches, and outposts that were spread out over a large area. Pétain's efforts to maintain coordination between these positions allowed the French to mount a coherent defense despite the chaos of the battle. His leadership was instrumental in keeping the French army focused on the objective of holding Verdun, even as the situation seemed increasingly dire. The French soldiers themselves, despite the overwhelming pressure, displayed incredible courage and tenacity. As the battle wore on, they faced relentless artillery bombardments, gas attacks, and constant assaults from the Germans. The constant shelling turned Verdun into a wasteland, with entire forests flattened and the landscape transformed into a sea of craters. The French soldiers had to endure these horrors while maintaining their resolve to hold the city. Their determination was epitomized by the slogan, "En tient, en tient," we hold, which became a rallying cry among the troops. The French also had to contend with the psychological toll of the battle. The constant bombardment, the loss of comrades, and the brutal conditions created an environment of fear and despair. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the French soldiers continued to fight, bolstered by a sense of duty to protect their homeland. This unyielding spirit of resistance was a key factor in the French success at Verdun. The role of French civilians was also significant in the defense of Verdun. As the battle raged on, many civilians from the surrounding areas were evacuated, but others chose to stay behind and provide support to the troops. Civilians helped with logistics, supplied food and water to the soldiers, and aided in the evacuation of the wounded. The solidarity between the soldiers and the civilians in the region further strengthened the resolve to hold Verdun at all costs. Throughout the battle, France was also able to receive vital supplies from its allies, including Britain. Though the British were focused on other theaters of the war, they made efforts to provide ammunition, equipment, and other resources to support the French defense. The collaborative effort between the French and their allies played an important role in ensuring that the defense of Verdun was not solely dependent on French resources. In conclusion, the French resistance at Verdun was a testament to the determination, courage, and national pride of both the military and civilian populations. Under Petain's leadership, the French forces managed to hold the line against overwhelming odds, ensuring that the Germans could never break through to the heart of France. Verdun became a symbol of national unity and resistance, and the battle ultimately cemented France's resolve to continue the war until victory was achieved. The Battle of Verdun, fought over the course of 10 months, resulted in one of the most catastrophic and tragic losses of life in the history of warfare. Over 700,000 soldiers were either killed, wounded, or went missing, making Verdun one of the bloodiest battles of World War I. This staggering number of casualties speaks to the sheer intensity and ferocity of the battle, as well as the extreme conditions in which the soldiers fought. The scale of human suffering was unparalleled, and it left an indelible mark on both the French and German armies. One of the most harrowing aspects of the battle was the constant artillery bombardment. The Germans fired millions of shells at the French positions, with the goal of breaking their morale and softening up their defenses. The incessant shelling left the battlefield in ruins, with entire forests leveled and the land pocked with craters. The constant barrage not only destroyed the physical landscape, but also shattered the mental and emotional well-being of the soldiers who endured it. Many soldiers were killed instantly by artillery shells, while others were maimed or left with horrific injuries. The psychological toll of the artillery bombardment was profound, with soldiers experiencing shell shock, a condition that would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The conditions within the trenches themselves were another source of extreme suffering. Soldiers at Verdun had to contend with mud, rats, disease, and a lack of basic necessities like clean water and food. Trench foot, dysentery, and infections from untreated wounds were rampant, contributing to the high number of casualties. The trenches were often flooded, making it nearly impossible to stay dry, and soldiers were frequently exposed to the elements. The threat of gas attacks also loomed over them, adding to the fear and uncertainty. The trenches at Verdun were not just military positions. They were grim, hellish environments where survival was a daily struggle. The French forces, in particular, suffered horrifically. To maintain a continuous defense, they had to send wave after wave of troops into the maelstrom of death that was Verdun. Thousands of young men were sacrificed in the defense of the city, many of them inexperienced soldiers who had only recently arrived at the front. The French military, recognizing the importance of Verdun, rotated units in and out of the front lines, but the human cost remained staggering. The French army also lost thousands of officers, further depleting its leadership cadre. The death toll among the French soldiers, particularly in the early months of the battle, was devastating, and many French families lost sons, brothers, and fathers. The German forces, too, suffered tremendous losses. Though they initiated the offensive and initially made some progress, the Germans faced the same brutal conditions. The German strategy of attrition, which relied on the continuous bombardment and frontal assaults, resulted in heavy losses as well. The German soldiers, too, had to endure the constant shelling, gas attacks, and the perilous conditions in the trenches. As the battle wore on, the German soldiers were not only physically exhausted but also demoralized by the lack of decisive progress. They had underestimated the resilience of the French defenders and the difficulty of holding Verdun. The German forces, like the French, were slowly worn down by the unrelenting violence of the battle. The high casualty numbers were also a result of the limited medical care available to the wounded. The medical infrastructure was overwhelmed by the sheer number of casualties, and many soldiers who could have been saved died from lack of proper care or were left to suffer without treatment. The wounded were often transported in rudimentary conditions, and the battlefields themselves were littered with the dead and dying. The intense fighting at Verdun, combined with the limited medical resources and the sheer scale of the battle, meant that the number of casualties was not just high, but also disproportionately devastating. Beyond the soldiers, the emotional toll of the battle extended to the families and loved ones of the fallen. The families of the soldiers who died at Verdun often received little in the way of closure. The chaos of the battle meant that many bodies were never recovered, and some soldiers went missing without a trace. The grief of these families was compounded by the lack of information, and the absence of proper burials for the dead made the tragedy even more poignant. The legacy of the casualties at Verdun was far-reaching. In France, the battle became a national symbol of sacrifice and endurance. The graves of those who died at Verdun were marked with memorials, and many of the soldiers who survived the battle would carry the psychological scars for the rest of their lives. In Germany, the loss of life was similarly devastating, and the battle marked a turning point in their war strategy, signaling the failure of the attempt to break the French through attrition. Verdun became a symbol of the horrors of modern warfare, highlighting the immense human cost of the conflict and the futility of the strategies employed by both sides. The casualties at Verdun were not just numbers. They represented the destruction of a generation of men, their lives shattered by the brutality of war. The Battle of Verdun was marked by a level of artillery use that had never before been seen on the battlefield. Artillery played a central role in shaping the battle, and the use of heavy artillery was one of the defining characteristics of this conflict. The battle was not just a clash of infantry, but a relentless war of attrition dominated by massive bombardments, devastating shelling, and the destruction of the very landscape itself. This heavy reliance on artillery demonstrated the sheer scale of violence and technological advancement in modern warfare during World War I. From the outset, the Germans recognized that Verdun's fortifications posed a significant challenge. They understood that a direct assault on the fortified French positions would likely fail without softening up the defenses first. Therefore, they resorted to an unprecedented artillery bombardment, launching millions of shells in the early stages of the battle. This bombardment was designed not only to destroy the fortifications and defensive positions, but also to demoralize the French defenders by subjecting them to constant shellfire. The Germans employed a variety of artillery pieces, including large-caliber howitzers, mortars, and field guns, each capable of delivering devastating explosions. The sheer volume of firepower used during the battle was staggering. On the German side, over 1 million shells were fired in the initial bombardment alone. This constant shelling turned Verdun into a wasteland. The landscape was virtually unrecognizable, with entire forests flattened, villages obliterated, and the earth itself turned into a patchwork of craters. The French defenders were forced to endure not only the physical destruction, but also the psychological torment of being under near-constant bombardment. The sound of shells whistling overhead became a constant feature of life at the front, and the pressure of knowing that a shell could land at any moment added to the terror of combat. French defensive positions were subjected to immense pressure, as the German artillery focused its fire on the entrenched fortifications surrounding Verdun. The forts, which had been built to withstand long sieges, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume of shells. Fort Douaumont, one of the most important French strongholds, was heavily damaged during the early stages of the battle, and its eventual fall to the Germans was a major psychological blow to the French. Despite the initial successes of the Germans, however, the French remained resolute, and the defense was not broken. French forces, under the leadership of General Philippe Pétain, implemented measures to ensure that soldiers could rotate in and out of the front lines to avoid exhaustion and that supplies could reach the defenders, despite the bombardment. The dominance of artillery was not just about the destruction of the terrain, but also about the impact on infantry tactics. The constant shelling created an environment where traditional infantry movements were rendered almost impossible. The trenches became littered with unexploded shells, debris, and bodies, and advancing across the open fields became a near-suicidal task. The mud and craters made movement slow and difficult, and soldiers were forced to adapt their tactics to the artillery-dominated battlefield. The infantry were often relegated to smaller, localized attacks, as the sheer scale of the bombardment made large-scale advances nearly impossible. The French responded to the artillery bombardments in their own way, attempting to counter the German advantage. They also relied heavily on their own artillery, using it to target the German positions and provide counter-battery fire. French artillery was deployed to provide support for the defenders, firing on German positions to prevent further advances and provide cover for infantry counterattacks. However, French artillery units were often undermanned and overstretched, and their ability to match the German bombardment was limited. Despite this, French gunners displayed remarkable resourcefulness and courage, often continuing to fire in the face of overwhelming odds. The use of artillery also introduced the element of gas warfare at Verdun. Both the French and the Germans used poison gas, though to different extents. The Germans had already begun to experiment with gas attacks earlier in the war, and at Verdun, they deployed chlorine gas and phosgene in an effort to break the French resistance. Gas attacks added to the already unbearable conditions, as soldiers faced the constant threat of poison gas in addition to the artillery bombardments. Gas masks became an essential part of the soldiers' equipment, but they offered only limited protection. Gas attacks caused widespread panic and confusion among the troops, further eroding morale and making the battlefield even more inhospitable. The importance of artillery at Verdun also had far-reaching consequences for the development of military tactics in the future. The battle highlighted the need for better coordination between infantry and artillery and led to the development of new strategies that incorporated more effective use of artillery in subsequent battles. In particular, the idea of creeping barrages, where artillery fire was used to clear paths for advancing infantry, was refined during and after the battle. These tactics would later be used in other major offensives, such as the Battle of the Somme. The dominance of artillery at Verdun also underscored the increasing reliance on industrial-scale warfare. The ability to produce vast quantities of ammunition and artillery shells was critical to sustaining the battle. Both the French and the Germans relied on their industrial capacities to keep up with the relentless demands of the battle. The production of shells, the supply of munitions, and the transportation of artillery pieces to the front lines became vital components of the war effort. In conclusion, the role of artillery in the Battle of Verdun was central to the nature of the conflict. It shaped the battlefield, influenced tactics, and caused unimaginable destruction and loss of life. The artillery bombardments were a constant reminder of the scale and brutality of modern warfare, and the battle marked a turning point in the use of heavy artillery as a primary weapon in the First World War. The relentless pounding of artillery during Verdun remains one of the defining features of the battle and a stark reminder of the destructive power of modern weaponry. The Battle of Verdun was not just a military conflict. It became a powerful symbol of French resilience, national pride, and the unbreakable spirit of a people who were determined to defend their homeland at all costs. It was a battle that encapsulated the very essence of French endurance, and its legacy resonated far beyond the trenches of Verdun itself. The French resistance at Verdun became a defining moment in the collective consciousness of the nation, fostering a sense of unity and patriotism that would carry France through the remaining years of World War I and beyond. The strategic importance of Verdun was well understood by both the French and the Germans. The Germans saw the city as a symbol of France's military strength, and they hoped to destroy both its physical defenses and its national spirit. For the French, however, the very idea of losing Verdun was inconceivable. The city was not only a fortified stronghold, it represented the heart of France's defensive strategy and a symbol of the country's historical and cultural identity. To abandon Verdun would have meant surrendering to the enemy, and the French leadership knew that the nation could not afford such a loss. Verdun was a rallying point, a place where the fate of France seemed to hang in the balance. The defense of the city became a matter of national pride, and the French forces were determined to hold it at all costs, regardless of the sacrifices required. General Philippe Pétain, who was appointed to lead the French defense of Verdun in early 1916, played a pivotal role in shaping the French approach to the battle. Pétain understood that Verdun's symbolic significance could not be overstated. His leadership was grounded in a deep sense of duty to his country, and he was determined to ensure that Verdun would not fall. He famously declared, "Ils ne passeront pas," meaning they shall not pass. This statement became an enduring symbol of French determination and resolve, and it encapsulated the spirit that would define the defense of Verdun. Pétain's leadership was not just about military tactics. It was about maintaining the morale of the troops, ensuring that they could continue to fight in the face of overwhelming odds. One of the key elements that allowed the French to hold Verdun was their ability to maintain the morale of the soldiers who were defending it. Pétain was acutely aware of the toll that the constant bombardment and the horrific conditions of trench warfare had on the soldiers. As the battle dragged on, the French soldiers were rotated in and out of the front lines to avoid complete exhaustion, and Pétain worked tirelessly to ensure that they had the supplies and reinforcements they needed. He also made a concerted effort to improve communication between the various sectors of the battlefield, ensuring that reinforcements could be deployed where they were needed most. The resilience of the French soldiers at Verdun is a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. The soldiers were subjected to constant artillery bombardments, gas attacks, and brutal conditions. The landscape was utterly destroyed, and the trenches became a hellish environment where soldiers lived in fear of death and injury every day. Yet, despite these hardships, the French soldiers refused to yield. They understood that the defense of Verdun was not just about holding a city. It was about preserving their national honor and protecting their homeland from the horrors of occupation. They fought with unwavering determination, even as the casualties mounted and the situation seemed increasingly hopeless. The soldiers at Verdun were not fighting alone. The French civilian population played an essential role in the defense of the city. The area around Verdun became a hub of logistical support, with civilians working tirelessly to provide food, medical supplies, and other resources to the soldiers at the front. The French public also demonstrated remarkable solidarity, with families across the country making sacrifices to ensure that the military had the resources it needed. The civilian contribution to the defense of Verdun was crucial, and it highlighted the national unity that underpinned the French war effort. The symbol of French resilience at Verdun was also reinforced by the international community. While the British and other allies were engaged in their own battles on the Western Front, they recognized the importance of Verdun to the French cause. The Allies understood that if Verdun fell, it could lead to a collapse of French morale and a weakening of the entire Allied effort. As a result, the British made efforts to provide support to the French, including supplying ammunition, artillery, and reinforcements. This cooperation between the French and their allies demonstrated the broader sense of solidarity in the fight against Germany and helped to bolster French morale during the long months of the battle. As the battle dragged on, the concept of Verdun as a symbol of French resilience became more firmly embedded in the national psyche. The phrase "entente," we hold, became another rallying cry for the French soldiers, emphasizing their determination to stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds. This collective spirit of resistance inspired not only the soldiers at the front, but also the French population at home, who saw the defense of Verdun as a testament to the indomitable will of their country. The battle became a unifying force, galvanizing the French people and fostering a deep sense of patriotism that would persist throughout the war. Even after the battle ended, the legacy of Verdun remained a powerful symbol of French national identity. The victory at Verdun was not just a military triumph. It was a moral and psychological victory that allowed the French to maintain their resolve throughout the remainder of the war. The memory of the sacrifice made at Verdun, both by the soldiers who fought and those who supported them, became an enduring part of France's collective consciousness. Verdun would go on to be commemorated in memorials, monuments, and ceremonies, serving as a reminder of the courage and endurance of those who defended the city and, by extension, the nation itself. In the aftermath of the battle, Verdun was forever linked to the idea of resistance against overwhelming odds. The sacrifice and resilience shown by the French at Verdun became a model of courage and perseverance, not just for France, but for all who witnessed the battle. It was a battle that proved that, even in the face of the most brutal and destructive conditions, the human will to defend one's homeland could remain unbroken. Verdun became not only a military victory, but a symbol of the strength and resilience of the French people. The Battle of Verdun had profound implications for the course of World War I, both in terms of military strategy and the psychological effect it had on all the nations involved. The battle became a defining moment in the war, shaping the tactics, morale, and political decisions that would influence the remainder of the conflict. The consequences of Verdun extended far beyond its immediate military outcomes. Its legacy has resonated throughout history, influencing the ways wars are fought and remembered. From its impact on French and German military strategy to the broader effects on the Western Front, Verdun's significance cannot be overstated. Strategic and tactical shifts. First and foremost, Verdun marked a turning point in military strategy during World War I. The German plan to break the French by forcing them to commit all their resources to defend Verdun through attrition backfired. The strategy of prolonged bombardment followed by a war of attrition aimed to demoralize the French and force them to deplete their manpower reserves. The Germans believed that by exhausting the French in a long, grinding battle, they would break the French resolve and force them to negotiate a peace. However, the French resistance under General Philippe Pétain's leadership proved to be more formidable than the Germans anticipated. The French forces, despite enduring catastrophic losses, held their ground, and Verdun became a symbol of national pride and determination. The failure of the German strategy at Verdun forced them to rethink their approach to fighting the war. The battle revealed the limitations of their approach to trench warfare, where massive artillery bombardments and direct assaults were often ineffective. The battle demonstrated that maintaining a defensive line was far more challenging than anticipated, and this shift in understanding forced the Germans to reconsider their military tactics for the remainder of the war. It also underscored the importance of defense-in-depth strategies, where the focus would be on holding key terrain and strategic positions rather than attempting to break through the enemy lines through attrition. On the French side, the battle also changed their military strategies. The high cost of holding Verdun forced the French to reconsider their reliance on fortifications and static defense. While Verdun was successfully defended, it became evident that a more flexible, mobile approach to warfare would be necessary in future offensives. The experience at Verdun led the French to refine their strategies, emphasizing greater coordination between infantry, artillery, and air support. These lessons would play a critical role in later French offensives, such as the Second Battle of the Marne, where they would achieve significant successes by implementing more innovative tactics. Psychological impact and morale. Verdun's impact on morale was profound, not only for the armies involved, but for the home front as well. The French saw the defense of Verdun as a symbolic struggle for national survival, and the losses suffered at Verdun were felt deeply throughout France. The idea of Verdun became inseparable from the French national identity. It was a place where the nation's resolve was tested. The bravery and resilience displayed by the French soldiers gave rise to a spirit of patriotism that united the country. However, the immense toll the battle took on the French people also contributed to war weariness. As the months dragged on, the French public became increasingly disillusioned with the scale of the suffering, leading to increased pressure on the French government to end the war. For the Germans, the failure at Verdun had a significant psychological effect as well. While the Germans initially gained ground, they were never able to break the French lines and achieve the decisive victory they had hoped for. The scale of casualties on both sides and the inability to achieve a clear victory contributed to a sense of futility that began to undermine morale within the German army. The realization that the war could not be won by attrition alone led to a reassessment of German strategy, particularly as the Allies began to gain ground in other theaters of the war. Legacy of the battle. The legacy of Verdun extends far beyond the war itself. The battle had a lasting impact on how future generations would view both the Great War and the horrors of modern industrial warfare. In France, Verdun became a national symbol of sacrifice and unity. Monuments to the battle and its fallen soldiers, such as the Douaumont ossuary, became iconic representations of the cost of war. These memorials serve not only as places of remembrance, but also as a testament to the resilience of the French people during one of the most harrowing moments in their history. Verdun also contributed to the larger memory of World War I, which would shape the collective consciousness of Europe for decades. The brutality and high casualties associated with the battle served as a reminder of the human cost of war. It became a focal point in the post-war peace efforts and the creation of new international systems designed to prevent such destruction in the future. The scale of the battle highlighted the need for diplomacy and international cooperation to prevent conflicts from escalating into such catastrophic bloodshed. The enduring impact of Verdun can also be seen in the way it shaped the narrative of World War I for future generations. The battle became emblematic of the senseless slaughter and the futility of trench warfare, where soldiers fought and died for small, insignificant gains. The images of the destroyed landscape, the mountains of casualties, and the sheer horror of the battle continue to haunt both the French and German national memories of the war. It influenced later military thinkers and historians, serving as a lesson in the devastating consequences of unrestrained warfare and the importance of achieving a swift and decisive victory, rather than allowing a conflict to devolve into a war of attrition. Diplomatic and political repercussions. Verdun also had important diplomatic and political ramifications, particularly for France. The French victory at Verdun, though achieved at a staggering cost, served to solidify the resolve of the French government and the general population. It sent a clear message to the Allies that France was committed to the war effort, and it solidified the bond between the French and British forces. The victory at Verdun provided the French with a sense of vindication and a psychological boost, especially as the Germans had failed to achieve their strategic objective. For the Germans, the failure at Verdun led to a re-evaluation of their war aims and strategy. After the battle, the German High Command realized that a breakthrough on the Western Front would be exceedingly difficult without a more substantial shift in strategy. The inability to decisively defeat the French at Verdun led the Germans to pursue other plans, such as the development of new offensives and the eventual introduction of new tactics in 1917, including the stormtrooper tactics that would help them gain ground during the spring offensive. However, the failure at Verdun foreshadowed the eventual collapse of the German war effort, as the morale of the German forces would continue to erode, culminating in their eventual defeat in 1918. In conclusion, the Battle of Verdun had profound and far-reaching effects on both the course of World War I and the broader historical narrative of the conflict. It shaped military strategy, influenced the morale of the soldiers and the home front, and left a lasting legacy that continues to be remembered to this day. Verdun became more than just a battle. It was a symbol of resistance, a lesson in the destructive power of modern warfare, and a moment in history that profoundly shaped the world's understanding of the costs of war. Its legacy lives on not just in the history books, but in the memories of those who lived through it, and in the commemorations that continue to honor the sacrifice of all those who fought there. In conclusion, the Battle of Verdun stands as one of the most significant and harrowing events of World War I. It was a battle of attrition, a brutal test of endurance, and a testament to the resilience and unyielding spirit of the French soldiers and their allies. Verdun's impact was not just limited to the military outcomes, but also to the profound psychological and emotional effects it had on the French, the Germans, and the world at large. The sacrifices made during those grueling months forged a national identity in France, symbolizing the courage and determination to preserve their sovereignty at any cost. The legacy of Verdun, with its unimaginable human cost and its pivotal role in shaping the course of the war, serves as a reminder of the horrors of industrialized warfare. It underscores the need for peace, the importance of diplomacy, and the responsibility to prevent future conflicts of such magnitude. Verdun is not just a historical event. It is a solemn reflection on the price of war and the unwavering will to stand firm in the face of unimaginable adversity. The lessons learned at Verdun continue to resonate, as its story is passed down through generations, ensuring that the sacrifices of those who fought there are never forgotten.